James pushing and shoving. James and Teletovic.
It's pretty hard to believe what Mirza Teletovic did to LeBron James that caused him to want to rip his head off, but you're going to want to stay until the end of the video to see exactly what happened between these two. When you first think of LeBron James, you think of an NBA champion, someone who's in the same conversation as the great Michael Jordan of the Chicago Bulls. Those two are fantastic players on the court who allowed their game to do the talking while also sending out a little trash talk to the players who deserve it. However, James has gotten himself into quite a few confrontations with players from around the league, and in today's video, we're going to go into detail over some of those instances. Let's start off with a fight he got into with his very own teammate. Yeah, you heard that correctly. This first incident regarding LeBron James was an interesting one. While he was still with the Miami Heat, the team was locked in a tight game against the Indiana Pacers, who were still among the better teams in the Eastern Conference because they had Paul George in his prime. The Heat were on a defensive possession when George was randomly left wide open for a three-pointer, which, of course, he drilled. Now, because nobody ever went over to guard him, this caused LeBron James to look confused and wonder whose job it was to defend him. Mario Chalmers was the only one who seemed to be responding to James, so you'd think it was either one of their responsibilities, and neither of them admitted it. It didn't seem like anything to write home about at first until the cameras looked over at the Heat during a timeout and Chalmers was yelling at James on the sidelines. LeBron was talking back at first, and it seemed like a normal conversation between two competitive NBA players, until James suddenly flew up from his seat and started walking towards Chalmers to get in his face. This instantly caused other players on the team to step in and separate the two of them before things got any worse. They argued for a little longer after that, but had apparently cooled down by the time the break was over and returned to the court. However, Chalmers took the ball around a set screen and attempted a very risky pass between two defenders to a cutting James. The ball was quickly intercepted and taken the other way. Now, maybe Chalmers was just trying to force in the ball to cool the situation, or maybe he just genuinely made a bad pass. Either way, LeBron just looked tired of it all and was the last person to pass half court and go play defense. But most of the time, LeBron is known for his outstanding work ethic and skill set on the basketball court. What he isn't known for, though, is his anger and ability to start drama during the game. But that's something that definitely happened in a match between the Cleveland Cavs and the Detroit Pistons in the 2016 playoffs. Now, during the entire series against the Cavaliers, there were multiple Detroit players who were desperately trying to get into the head of James. Stanley Johnson was just a young player at the time, and yet he took time out of his day to attack LeBron and overshadow his impact on the court. The two ended up getting into a small altercation in which LeBron allegedly gave Johnson a bump during the game. Johnson went to the reporters after the game and labeled the bump as a cheap-ass shot. But he didn't just stop there. He trashed on James even more despite being so young into his NBA career, going so far as to say, quote, "I am definitely in his head, that's for sure. Johnson then said that he wasn't afraid of LeBron and that James laces his shoes up the same way anybody else does. LeBron never stooped to that level though, because he obviously knew how young Johnson was at the time and due to the fact that his team was crushing Detroit in the opening round of the postseason. For the rest of that series, James simply locked himself in both offensively and defensively in order to ensure his team would get the victory and advance while simultaneously sending Stanley and the Pistons packing. In this next incident, the Cleveland Cavaliers were facing off against the New York Knicks, and there was about 1 minute remaining in the game. LeBron drove to the basket and was met by none other than Enes Kanter. Kanter held up surprisingly well, and James ended up getting forced away from the basket, missing the layup and getting the rebound knocked outside to a fellow Cav teammate. While he reset the play, James slipped under the net and got a wide-open alley-oop to drop because Kanter lost him during the offensive rebound. James landed and started running back to the other end, but literally ran straight into the rookie Frank Ntilikina for seemingly no reason at all. Not only that, but he chose to just stand next to him as if Frank was supposed to get out of his way and allow him to pass. Ntilikina stood his ground though and shoved him away, starting a small scuffle when Kanter sprinted over to defend his young teammate from the King. The second those two got into each other's faces and started arguing, the rest of the Knicks and Cavaliers players started filing over, and it created quite a big scene on the court. This was a more random incident as you genuinely couldn't tell why LeBron bumped into Ntilikina like that, but at least the teammates and refs were able to settle it down quickly before it escalated into ejections and suspensions. But there were almost a few of those in this next moment involving LeBron. The Miami Heat were down by 5 points early in the fourth quarter against the Brooklyn Nets and were trying to get themselves back into the game. A guard on the Nets drove hard to the basket but was rejected at the rim by one of the Heat players, kickstarting a fast break for the Heat that was led by James. James had a few options to turn to while he sprinted down court, but opted to take the ball to the cup himself for a layup. There was only one problem though. Mirza Teletovic was sitting back there to try and defend every Heat player himself due to the fast break. And when he realized that James wasn't going to pass it up and rather take it himself, Teletovic just wrapped his arms around James and spun him mid-play. He didn't really think much of it until LeBron charged after him, while the officials ran over to split them up. It truly looked like LeBron was running over to start a full-out fight by the way he stomped over to Teletovic. Next thing you know, there are teammates and coaches all over the floor trying to get the situation all calmed down and avoiding any punches being thrown. Mirza, on the other hand, didn't even care about the entire thing. Every single time the camera cut over to him, he was just seen smiling and laughing. Teletovic clearly didn't care that LeBron was upset, and even looked proud of himself for not backing down and just trying to stop a play that would have resulted in 2 points for the Heat. If you enjoyed seeing the most memorable LeBron James fights, then check out the video that appears on your screen now for more fights involving your favorite NBA stars.